and everything as we go forward?
I don't think on the Type 26 there are a number of tools that we can deal with inflation. One is some of the structure of the contracts were fixed price anyhow, so you know, and the risk is shared. The batch 2 Type 26, we've improved the risk share so that both BAE and ourselves share the impact of cost increases for certain reasons, and that's important. Secondly, of course, any budget like ours, which is about £14 billion of capital spending every year, is going to be victim of inflation greater than some other departments that don't have so much capital spend. At the latest negotiation round, I've got some funding to mitigate some of that inflationary impact, and we'll see that play through in the next 12 months. But of course, we have to see, if we have to cut our cloth, continual, we look at other areas, either, you know, what's my priority in the whole equipment programme, or indeed, you know, on top of the Type 26 are the things that go on top of it, which we call the government fixtures. Government fixtures are things like electronic warfare, type of communications, type of anti-ship missile or no anti-ship missile, but air defence missile, all those sort of things. They can actually account for a very large proportion of the overall ship. And sometimes, if I look in the past, the department or the Navy has often, that's where the cost growth has been, either because they're making gold-plated decisions, and when we come to the FSS, I can tell you about some of the decisions that I reversed that I think had a significant cost impact that didn't need to be on it.
Okay, right, let's get on to FSS, and first, DG Brock.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, gentlemen. Good afternoon, rather, gentlemen. It's good to see you here, and thank you very much for attending. I wonder, just going to the FSS ships, we've heard the announcement made, I think it was on November the 16th. It was the day after the Prime Minister happily announced the 5 extra 26s that had been promised to Scotland previously were in fact going to be built in Scotland, which was very good news. But the Spanish-led team, the Resolute bid, was selected as the preferred bidder for the FSS ship contract over the Team UK bid, which would have delivered rather a lot more work for Scottish shipbuilding. And I just wondered if you could tell us something about the split in spend between Spain and Navantia, I think it is, and the UK yards. Is someone able to break that down for us?
So first of all, I have to give you one health warning. Having announced, we then do the subject detailed contracting. So I have to give that slight health warning, which I expect us to hopefully sign eventually in the detail next few months.
Hopefully by New Year.
So where we are is that the ships, 3 ships, which is approximately £1.6 billion of order, they will be built in 3 blocks. So as you'll see when you go around the yards, we build our ships in blocks nowadays, and the aircraft carrier that was assembled in Rosyth was built around the United Kingdom in different blocks and sailed together. So it will, the 3 blocks, so the bow and the middle section will be made on current planning in Harland and Wolff in Belfast and Appledore in Devon, and indeed some work in Methil and the Harnish yards as well in Scotland, potentially. The aft, the back end of the ship, will be made currently in Spain, and then the ship is only one part. It's the box, right? The metal box. So what then is important, what goes in is like gearings, engines, navigational aids, electrical power systems, all the way up to lifeboats, life jackets, and curtains, I suspect. And in those big groups, those systems, we also expect some, or I don't know what, we'll see this in the contracting, UK sourced equipment as well. And then the whole ship will be built as one in Harland and Wolff in Belfast. And if people go, oh, well, you're building the back end in Spain, I represent a Lancashire constituency where I have a good few thousand constituents who make the Typhoon Eurofighter. The Typhoon Eurofighter is entirely integrated or built on the production line at Walton, but it's got Spanish wings, British ejector seats. Modern, complex engineering equipment is often made in component part. Go to any car factory in the UK and you'll find the engine comes from, I don't know, Germany, and the gearbox comes from wherever.
Okay.
So that is what we completely put together as one ship into Belfast as well, and that's how it will be constructed.
Okay. I mean, we've heard that, I think that the ships will be substantially integrated in the UK, and I know that was a decision the Confederation of Shipbuilding and Engineering Unions described as a complete disappointment. I mean, the UK government...
I spoke to the local unions, both Appledore and Belfast, well, Appledore and Harland and Wolff Company. They don't reflect that, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Well, they
Interesting
don't.
to hear.
Well,
But the UK government initially said the fleet solid support ships would be classified as warships and so built in the UK. So why did the approach change?
They are going to be entirely built as a one ship in Harland and Wolff in the United Kingdom.
Okay.
It depends what you define as the components and blocks. If we want to go down that the only thing you can describe is entirely built in the United Kingdom, then no car in this country is built in the United Kingdom, no aeroplane is built in this United Kingdom, because modern technology isn't worked that way.
Okay, and just getting back to the spend, we don't have a percentage, breakdown in any way. There's no sort of idea at the moment about what might be the spend in Spain and what might be the spend here. I'm just thinking, because Navantia is a state-owned company, isn't it? State-owned shipbuilding.
I think partly, yes.
Yeah, yes. I'm just wondering, we haven't got any hint yet as to what that might be?
Well, no, I don't at the moment. We'll see when, subject to the contract details, I'll be happy to let you know that when I see that.
Very helpful.
But I think there is another thing that was attractive about the Navantia bid, and Scotland isn't adverse to foreign contributions to manufacturing. Raytheon in Fife, for example, is a US company, does very well. Leonardo in Edinburgh, I'm sure you don't object to that. This consortium is going to invest £72 million into our yards and also going to train some 200 apprentices and graduates for that, plus 800 people in the supply chain it's going to employ, and 300 welders and apprenticeships in the UK. So, if we want to play the sort of national card about, a bit of it's Spain, Nissan, if I remember rightly, at Sunderland, is the most productive car plant in Europe, right? It actually almost saved single-handedly, as Honda did, British car making. Our challenge in shipbuilding is productivity, as you know, and that we've got to prove it.
I just thought, the FSS, there was a lot of controversy around those builds, and they were, the UK government did say initially they would be built as warships, and therefore,
it's going to be entirely
UK,
constructed.
so...
You will see a ship entirely put together
okay.
in Belfast for the first time, a warship for the first time in 15, 16 years. Okay. In Belfast, and it's going to grow the jobs in Harland and Wolff, another historical yard, probably historically a Glasgow rival, but nevertheless a UK yard, going to construct it there. And I think that is good news for British shipbuilding. And just so you're aware, I constructed the contract, so there was a separation between the design and the prime companies, so this in this case Navantia and Harland and Wolff, and where they build the shipyard. Because BAE don't have a spare shipyard at the moment, right? It's full of our Type 26 orders. So I wanted that whoever won to be able to fill the troughs, because the problem with British shipbuilding has been peak and troughed for so many years, it's very hard to get investment to modernise the yard. And I wanted whoever won to be able to then pick a yard and place it. Now, disappointingly, Babcock chose to lock itself into one bidder only, which was the BAE, and that meant Recise didn't have the best chance of potentially filling its yard with an order. If it had actually done as we had recommended, then whoever won could have shopped around and found an empty yard in order to access the funding that we need to modernise it. That's the only way we're going to build a British shipbuilding industry that's modernised and ready for the future.
Just to clarify, you recommended to Babcock to not get involved in... with the
No, I didn't do that. I said I constructed the contract so that the prime, so the bidder and the design house effectively could shop around for where they wanted to actually place the construction of their ship. And Babcock clearly took the choice to only bid with one bidder. And I'm not sure if there was any specifics. We didn't ring up Babcock and say do this or don't do that. That's not for us to do.
We specifically did not do that. We provided the opportunity for a fair and open competition for all yards in the UK.
Right.
That's important.
Clarify that, yeah.
Okay, just returning to your points about jobs, Secretary of State, the Team UK's bid apparently would have supported a lot more jobs in the UK. That's certainly what was being reported, resulted in £90 million of investment in shipyards as opposed to the 77 million the government's announced, and as I say, many more jobs.
I wouldn't quite buy into the spin you're getting from the union leadership and some of the consortium.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Their bid was non-compliant.
Could you just tell us a little bit more about what it was about the Team Resolute's bid that outweighed those apparent benefits? And also, I wonder if you could talk, because the whole issue of the social value element of the contract was, I'd say, a little vague when people appeared in front of us up to now, and I wonder if you could maybe just explain a little bit more about how that helped to win the contract for the Resolute bid.
Well, look, I mean, obviously it was a commercial process. I'd be slightly careful how I compare the two. What I can talk about is that the winning bid proved both ability to invest in the yards at 77 million pounds, as I've said, a commitment to a number of skills investments and workforce investments. It obviously would comply with our requirements on crewing numbers and indeed timescales and budget, I would guess. All important things to making sure that is done, and our requirement to finally assemble or fully assemble the final ship in a British UK yard, and they complied with all of those. They clearly, therefore, were the bid that was compliant and won and got the order placed with them. And, you know, let's remember, as you said rightly, I think it was the next day or the day after, BAE, one of the other bidders and the other one, got a massively multi-billion pound contract for Type 26. So it's not quite the story of, feast or famine that might be painted by the other consortium.
All right. Well, actually, I was going to ask you about that, because we've heard a lot about how important the drumbeat of orders are for Scottish shipbuilding. Does that decision not to award the FSS then, you feel, is not going to make any difference to that drumbeat with the orders? There's not going to be a gap?
Well, I think there's 130, 150 ships in the theoretical pipeline of orders, all the different government departments, all the different agencies, DEFRA and all these other things in the next 30 years. And of course, it's important that where possible, these ships are built in British yards. And one of the things the National Shipbuilding Office does is help advise other government departments about placing bids in how to place bids in British yards. And that's up to, I'm not the commissioning yard for the Department of Transport, or, but the National Shipbuilding Yard, it does. I mean,
I just wonder if, I'm just wondering about that social value side of the contract. Can anyone sort of unpick what it was? You're nodding, Vice Admiral.
Yeah, I'll if I may, Secretary of State. Secretary of State is very clear when we set out the competition that he wanted me to maximise social value through two big drivers, as is described. First of all, maximising UK content, and secondly, that integration of the whole ship, building and integration of the whole ship in the UK. And around that, we have also highly incentivised in the competition supply chain development, as a result of which, and skills. As a result of which, of the £1.6 billion contract, the majority of that spend will be in the UK, and the majority of the bill will take place in Harland and Wolff. 1,200 highly skilled shipyard jobs, of which 200 will be graduates and apprentices, with 800 other skilled jobs in the UK supply chain, and the construction of an academy in Harland and Wolff to generate skilled fabrication and welding skills, another 300 skilled jobs there. So actually the two big sort of strategic levers that the Secretary of State asked us to introduce, and then coupled with supply chain development and value on skills, has resulted in the vast majority of that contract spend being in the UK. Because it's about, and the capital investment of the £77 million into facilities, so a combination of skills and capital investment, really to me says that that's about growth and it's about legacy for the future.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned Harland and Wolff. I know my colleague's going to bring that up soon. I think there are some concerns about its capacity to be able to cope with this level of work, but I mean, there's even been the suggestion that if unable to fulfil the order, then it could just pass to Navantia to complete. But I mean, that will be something I'm sure my colleague here will ask about. Just lastly, I mean, Secretary of State, of course, you mentioned that you're keen to encourage British shipbuilding in the UK, but this decision does apparently make the UK the only G7 country offshoring its warship production. Is that a pointer to the UK's approach in the future, or
No,
should we not take it as that?
No, I don't know. I mean, you know, I noticed the Scottish Government's propensity to place orders abroad all the time with its ships, and I'm just curious that you think that means Scottish Government doesn't care about its shipbuilding.
No, it's just warships and it's a G7.
Okay,
it's a
you're a
point.
worker in a yard in Ferguson, let's say, right, and you're interested in building a ship. You're not really fussed if it's a warship or a ferry, are you? You want to know you have a long-term job and a future and a skill base. Yeah. You're not going to sit there and argue the toss, say, no, I don't want one of your ferries, I want to build a warship. You want a sustainable job and a sustainable long-term pipeline in your yard, and that's important. So just because you've chosen in the Scottish Government, for example, to place an order in Turkey, I think, doesn't mean to say I think you don't care for your shipbuilding industry. I would never make that allegation. Mm-hmm. But I think that is a decision that has been made. We have placed an order that we think does the best. It invests in our yards, £77 million, invests in the young people and the skills. It places it in some yards at the moment that are not, that we need to get through the peaks and trough to make sure that they have a future, because some of them are fantastic yards. And I just be careful, if I may, I wouldn't, Harland & Wolff, and Appledore, for example, one of their purchases, is currently converting, I think, 3 ships for the Lithuanian Navy. It has a good track record of both private and public procurement. It's a yard in Devon. And Harland & Wolff has a famous history of shipbuilding. Absolutely. And has started doing quite a lot of work, I think, on refitting cruise ships. So it is already getting there. And I'm not going to take the risk on this thing suddenly falling over. And that's very important. We place it with some of those yards.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're delighted to have Kevin Jones as a guest from the Defence Select Committee with this afternoon with their interest.
Could you tell me who the actual prime contractor is on the SLS contract?
Admiral Marshall. Okay.
So the Team Resolute is obviously the winning, the preferred bidder, and Navantia will be the prime there. Navantia UK.
Yeah. Well, Navantia UK is a shell company. It was only incorporated in April of this year. So where is the risk in terms of who's underwriting the risk in terms of that contract? Is it the main Navantia company in Spain?
So the all bidders were subject to significant financial scrutiny in terms of the qualifying.
I've had sorry, a specific question. I've tried to get this from parliamentary questions, and you seem to keep dodging it. Where does the risk lie? Because Navantia UK is just a shell company. It's April this year it was incorporated. So what backing has that got in terms of this contract?
We're looking to the Team Resolute and the primes to...
No,
sorry?
Answer the question. Who actually where's the risk lie? Is it with Navantia UK?
So what I was going to say is that we're looking to the prime contractor to shoulder the risk.
If you like us, I will make sure we write to you with the detail. But
well, no, but if Navantia UK is a shell company, it's got no trading history. It was incorporated in April of this year.
okay, well, if it's a shell company belonging to a parent company of Avanti UK, Avanti Spain, then Avanti Spain and therefore the Spanish taxpayer, how delightful is that, will be taking the risk if the thing goes above price.
Wait a minute, Secretary of State. Can I hold you there? That is not the legal position. And I think you also need to look at your experience on Ajax, for example, where again, you've got a US parent company where the risk lies with a company in the UK rather than the actual... So I would have thought if you've given this contract, surely you must know where the risk lies. I mean, if it is the Spanish taxpayer payer in terms of Navantia, that's fine. But if you've just done it with the parent, with Navantia UK, it's a shell company, it doesn't have anything.
Look, I don't think Avanti is going to play some sort of timeshare shell company game that if it were to be in breach of its contract, it would risk its international reputation with one of the biggest defence customers in Europe because it sort of does a sort of we've all gone bust and no one's going to be there. I don't think that is going to happen, Kevin.
Well, you're in a similar situation.
And also,
you're in a similar situation with Ajax, aren't you?
No, we're not. So I've checked with Ajax. So Ajax, my understanding with the Ajax, and I'm happy to clarify in writing to you, is that General Dynamics US are liable ultimately as the parent company for Ajax.
Well, that's news to me, and it will be news to the Defence Committee. Can I just ask, therefore, about Harland Wolff? So we've established that Navantia, or part of Navantia, are the major prime. Harlan and Wolff. This is a company, if you look at it, hasn't registered company account since 2020, where it had £1 million, just over £1.4 million turnover. It's got debts of £5.7 million. So what due diligence was done on them to see whether they're capable of actually fulfilling this contract?
Look, they're all subject to due diligence. My contracts are subject to Cabinet Office approval and Treasury oversight. It is in no one's interest for us to be placing these in unviable yards or unviable primes. It is not in anyone's interest.
You've done it twice. I mean, this is a £1.6 million contract with a company which is a turnover, never made a profit, is a turnover of only over £1 million. And you talked about the Lithuanian Navy contract to Appledores. Appledore is a parent company, its main parent company is Harlan Wolff. The Appledore company itself has, I think, a £5 shareholder, and that's all it's worth.
Right,
So you've given, so wait a
in
minute.
all due respect, it's worth an awful lot to the hundreds of people I met who work at Appledore and have a life and a contract around those 3 Lithuanian ships and the previous servicing.
Well, that's fine, I accept. But I'm thinking about taxpayers' money. You've given a £55 million contract to a company which has got basically £5 shareholder. Its main parent company has only got a turnover of £1 million. In terms of taxpayer due diligence, that's what I'm concerned about, and those workers should be, because if it goes wrong, it's quite clear what's going to happen here is this work we're doing in Spain, won't it?
Well, the details of what will happen is what we're going to negotiate between now and the final contract, Kevin. And I just don't think, Kevin, slagging off one group of companies over the net helps anyone, right? We are trying to showcase British shipbuilding. BAE in the other, for example, consortium, and Babcock on the other consortium, are doing a fantastic job on the Type 26, okay? We are trying to make sure that the British industry isn't slagged off by our own, and I think it's a good offering. We awarded it to a good consortium who promised not only to come in within price, but also to come in on 77 million of investment into the yard.
I'm not slagging anybody off. All I'm wanting.
Well, I think you're slagging off Harlan and Wolff, Kevin, quite considerably.
I'm not slagging off. I'm just stating facts. If you're giving multi-billion-pound contracts to companies that actually, I've got to say, have got very little track record, and in terms of your issue about the split of work, very interesting. I was in Madrid a couple of weeks ago. You might want to tell the Foreign Office to change their line, because the ambassador told us when we met him there that the first ship will be built in Spain, and workforce will be moved from Spain to from Harlan Wolff to Spain to learn the techniques.
Well, we will be hoping that Navantia, who, whether you like it or not, Kevin, seems to have an extremely good track record of building ships around the world. We need, as I talked about Nissan and Honda, we need to learn from some of the market leaders. That is, I'm not ashamed of that. But secondly, there's another point here, which is this game of trying to engineer some form of 100% British. The irony is Type 26 is bought by the Australians and the Canadians because, fun enough, we are open to international competition and international collaboration. Would you rather have it that we said, no one's allowed to be part of this, and then I can guarantee Australia and Canada would not have bought our ship, would not have, because they want to build their own ships, and then where would we be for A, the taxpayer, B, the Navy, who wouldn't be able to afford those capability, and C, for British shipbuilding?
You know, I'm not saying that you shouldn't put contracts out into international collaboration, but I certainly don't also think we should just give and export jobs abroad. And can I ask about Australia and Navantia? You might want to speak to your Australian counterpart about their experiences with Navantia. But can I ask another question?
I'm seeing him tomorrow, so I'll be delighted
to. You might have to ask him about it. In terms of Harlan and Wolff, have you got any opinion that a week before the contract was actually signed or announced, that they announced, and ask me where they got it from, but they secured a £100 million loan facility on a company which has only got £1.4 million turnover? Did they know about this in advance, that they were going to get it?
I think there was a formal notification of a few days or whatever, I don't know, before there was a public announcement in order for the successful bidder to accept or decline, I think. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. How many days?
We informed them the weekend before the announcement to give them time to go back to their board.
So to do that.
Right.
But I noticed in the media that the other consortium had briefed out that they weren't going to win way before any decision had been made. So maybe they knew something I didn't know.
Well, they were told by your office they weren't going to get it. That's why. Can I ask, just in terms of the broader shipbuilding, because broadly I support, as you know, the shipbuilding strategy. I think is the right approach. But we're not having a very good time with it, are we? I mean, you are shipbuilding czar, so you should be able to move things around. I mean, we've got a case here where we're actually having build in Spain. We've got the Home Office still procuring boats in Holland. We've also got your own department in terms of the latest cable inspection vessel in Holland. We had the special vehicle you bought last year, £10 million contract from Holland. How much, and I accept you can't direct these departments, but how much in terms are we doing across government to say to departments, these contracts can be let in the UK, and if we are going to meet that ambition, which you quite rightly argue for in terms of national shipbuilding strategy, it's only been done if we've got got orders behind it. And exporting them to Holland is not a very good idea, is it?
Well, first of all, the Type 26 obviously announcement was not exporting to anywhere. Secondly, as I've said, the Future Solid Support Ship is, as part of the contracts we were negotiating, is that this ship will be entirely assembled, put together and finished off in the UK yards of Harland and Wolff. In the same way, I can't remember when you were Defence Minister whether you ever claimed Typhoon was built in Spain or Italy, Kevin, even though large components of that come from Spain, Italy and Germany.
No, but that's not the point.
It's the same thing,
There's
Kevin.
a big difference between this type of ship and that. But I mean, you referred to companies that claim to come here and be British as T-shirt jobs. That's exactly what we've got here, haven't we, with this Navantia contract?
No,
it's a T-shirt job.
No, because the 800 people who we're going to bring in, who are going to be trained as welders in the supply chain, the 300 welders going to be trained, the 200 graduate, they are all going to be enduring, sustainable jobs in the Future Solid Support Ship in the UK.
And have you looked at the Harland and Wolff's import of foreign labour, for example, to Scotland from Portugal and Spain?
It was probably about the same time when you were in government when Poles were brought into Rosyth to help build the aircraft carrier. You might be able to explain how you did it, because at the moment it's not very easy to bring people in, but it did happen under your government.
No, wait a minute though, just a minute. You can fire back like that, but you're in the decision-making seat now, Secretary of State, not me. But the point being is, for example, I think in their yard in Scotland, they brought in labour from Portugal. There's been some problems, I understand, from the unions with them actually getting paid, for example. So what's to stop Harland Wolff bringing in foreign labour into Belfast when they can't meet those very ambitious targets that you're going to set them in terms of creating skills?
So every shipbuilder, Babcock and BAE, have lobbied me to see if I can bring in foreign workers. Right? So the Team UK have asked to bring in foreign workers because they want to upskill their workforce or bring in skill shortages. Skill shortages in aerospace, in medicine, in all over this country. We're all facing skill shortages. I have another duty, which is to deliver ships on time to the Navy so they can protect these shores. That is a competing time zone, but we have to try and meet the timeline.
Could I just ask, just on Northern Ireland, it's still in the single market as part of that Northern Irish Protocol, so they've got access to freedom of movement, so they're going to be at a competitive advantage to the rest of the yards in the UK.
But part of the ship is going to be made in Appledore and Devon as well. I mean, look, I think my point is, one of the reasons we put in the conditions of this is that they train people and bring up a new generation of shipbuilding is one of the reasons we were, this thing will commit to doing that. Not saying that, in the Type 26, BAE are opening an academy. If you go to Barrow and Furness, you'll see, I think, nearly 1,000 apprentices started. So, of course, we want to invest in the skills.
But the problem is, Secretary of State, you've got the very historic and very proud history of Harland and Wolff as a name, but that's not what the company is now, is it? It's a shell. What it used
as
to
I've
be.
said,
and the idea of their capacity to be able to actually fill this contract is actually going to be very limited, isn't it?
I don't agree, and as I said, I don't think slagging off...
We're going to have to move on, because I know lots of other colleagues want to come in, but just...
Admiral
Rex, I know you want to come in, please.
Mr Jones, just on a point of fact, and I know you raised this with Mr Speller previously, on the border force cutters, as I said on record then, and I have written to you in response to your letter, I can categorically state the border force cutters are not engaged with the Netherlands, the PIN hasn't even been released, and the procurement strategy hasn't even been decided on. So whoever is feeding you that information is feeding you incorrect information, I'm afraid.
No one's feeding it, but isn't it your job to ensure that the UK do actually procure those ships in the UK rather than actually in Holland? I mean, we've had two
Why did you come up with Holland, Kevin? Where did they come from?
Okay, we'll leave that here. Just one thing that you just...
Well, you've ordered 2 ships
okay,
from Holland
Kevin, thank you.
Just the time that's been a Scottish Affairs Committee.
Yeah.
Never touched on that
We
issue.
will decide whether what's a waste of time.
I can see that
Here
was
is
a waste
a
of time.
guest
Yeah, but
coming
it
from the...
nothing to do with our inquiry.
Enough just now, thank you. Just one thing I want to know... One thing I would like to hear from you, Secretary, is there any sort of pre-contract agreement that you have in place with either Team Resolute or with Harland and Wolff? So if it does manage to go wrong, that there's
I think that's what we do between now and the final contract.
So this is what you'll be working on just now?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, your concerns are valid. I don't want it, as I said, it's in no one's interest for whoever we place something with for something to go wrong. There was a recent contract between another UK prime that underestimated the cost of doing something on some of our warships considerably, and we've had to move it to another part of the UK, and that's not particularly, well, it's not comfortable, because I want our Navy to have those ships as soon as possible.
You could tell us today that this contract won't end up being delivered in Spain instead of Scottish shipyards.
Well, as I've said, a part of it is going to be, part of the component part of it is going to be constructed in Spain, but it's going to be entirely assembled in the UK. That is the condition of the contract.
Okay, thank you. Maritac.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for giving us your time today. Now, given its lack of formal powers, how is the National Shipbuilding Office going to ensure that decisions are made in a strategic way and hold other parts of government accountable?
Well, so first and foremost, at a ministerial level, and then I'll hand over to Admiral Cox to show you how we do it. We have an interministerial group chaired by me, and it is attended by ministers from all the associate departments, either as potentially customers, like the Home Office or Department of Transport, but also those departments that contribute to the strategy, whether that's through funding innovation, like UK Shore, which is trying to invest in and innovate, including in, I think, 2 Scottish companies in alternative energy propulsion systems, or indeed in future skills base, so the Department of Education, in making sure that we engage in trying to build that skilled workforce that is so important, and thirdly, obviously in other areas around export credits and home credits and things like that, that's so important to stimulate the market. But so we do that. We also do advice, because we are all subject to WTO rules, and that means in departments that are not building potentially a military ship, how can we advise them to maximise UK content or maximise UK contribution? And we use our knowledge and defence, having obviously over the decades built lots and lots of ships. How can we help them navigate their way through that? Because if you think about it, somewhere like the Home Office probably procures its cutters once every 30 years or something. It doesn't hold, a knowledge base of constantly buying ships. It's not something people do. So we definitely do our best to help them through that. And we've also commissioned areas like building shipyards of the future, so that we go and look at other, I'm afraid, potentially world-beating yards and see what is it I want Govan to look like and Scotstoun to look like and Rosyth to look like, so we win more orders in the future. And I think there's no harm in looking at our competitors, and we do that as well. And I think those things help the productivity. And then there is a office for exports to try and win as many exports around the world as well. But actual statute powers are limited as a way of directing, but political influence, political use of my office to push, encourage, and call upon the Scottish Government, call upon the Secretary of State for Scotland, or to use their offices to influence making sure something is here. That's all part of the same programme. Admiral Cox, do you want to?
Thank you, sir. And the Secretary of State outlined the structure. I mean, specifically in Scotland, my team and I interact and talk regularly with Scottish Government Manufacturing and Industries Division, Scottish Government Strategic Commercial Interventions Directorate, Transport Scotland, Marine Scotland, the Skills Development Scotland, and Enterprise Scotland, and also Scottish Maritime Cluster and CMAL. But we would welcome any support from this committee in furthering our relationship with the Scottish Government. But it's a really good relationship, and it's strengthening all the time.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. Has the NSO hub in Edinburgh been set up yet?
Well, thank you for asking. We're delighted. We've signed the lease on our Edinburgh hub. We have some space in the Queen Elizabeth building in Edinburgh, and we use that to base out of when we're in Scotland and interacting with all those agencies that I mentioned in my previous answer.
And do you know roughly how many staff will operate from there?
Yeah, well, overall, let's put this in perspective. The NSO team is 24, building to 30, including industry secondees. At the moment, I don't have any permanent staff based in Scotland, but we're a hybrid team. We recruit from across the United Kingdom, and I very much hope that will change. But at the moment, I use it with my team. I've been up 4 or 5 times this year. I will go up again in the new year to make best use of that. And it makes sense. You know, Scotland has an important part in the UK shipbuilding tapestry.
I mean, but roughly the size of the office space we've rented is 8 to 10 out of the 24 to 30. Right. If we recruited people, or the Scottish Government had people to suggest to support it or second in, we'd be delighted to base them in Edinburgh. I mean, I would like to see more permanent of that office. At the moment, it's a national shipbuilding office, so we advertise the places and people can effectively choose where they're going to be. I would encourage Scottish applicants.
Yeah. Does the NSO have access to the data it needs to be able to, make strategic decisions or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're a growing organisation, but we make use of all the wealth of data that exists out there. So not only do we commission studies and data ourselves, we also work, bilaterally and very closely with the shipyards. You can imagine shipyards are sometimes a little bit cagey about what they're prepared to share from a commercial perspective, but by building a good relationship with them across all the primes and the smaller Scottish yards as well, we think we're building up a good knowledge base.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
You, Chickett.
Oops. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today and giving us your time. I guess following on from quite a few of the questions that have come up already, how important a role do you think exporting ships and the design licences should play in sustaining a strong shipbuilding sector in Scotland, and how reliable do you expect military exports to be over the longer term to support that shipbuilding pipeline in the way that the shipbuilders and their yards will need to sustain?
So export is really important, first of all, for allowing us to afford our own capability. We very few nations on earth, potentially only China and the United States, can unilaterally build something just for itself. It just doesn't become viable if you want to keep in the top tier of your capabilities. So that's really important. So, for example, the Type 26, the anti-submarine warfare ship, it's so important that we've got Canada and Australia on board, and predominantly that is about the design. But with the design sometimes comes some unique capabilities. So like the gearbox is a very important part of that, and that is currently made in England and Huddersfield. And so those sort of supply chains, you can win at lots of levels. In the design, the prime company will take a proportion or a percentage for selling the design. The supply chain, not everything. So the Australians are having their own radar, for example, on the Type 26. But it may, we're often in the similar pool, and so you will find your supply chain can win as well, and that gives huge opportunities. So, for example, on, I think, the Type 26, we will be putting on the generic Mark 41 missile launcher, I think, on that one. That's right. And now, of course, that will be able to fire missiles such as ones made by Raytheon, but it's quite a generic launcher, so it will help all sorts of other type of missiles be launched. So I think overall, export allows you to win at lots of different levels. I think that's the key. It's not. Do I think there are many sort of tier one navies in the world that will buy an entire British ship as is? There are a few. But, you know, of course, Australia has an indigenous workforce. It wants to keep its yards working. Totally understandable. And that type of collaboration is ultimately important when it comes to British jobs as well.
Obviously, certainly not asking you to make any kind of hard and fast guarantees, but what can you say about how reliable that steady stream of military exports can and should be to sustain the
Well, I think if you have a diverse enough base, so you're not putting all your eggs in the metal box bit, or you're not putting all your eggs in the radar bit, then what you can do is you can cover your bases and win in different levels. So you remember the French submarine contract that was cancelled by the Australians, and obviously there was a lot of understandable sort of disappointment from the French. But what didn't get any media was actually Thales UK were in that consortium. We were, I think, providing the sonar for it. So I just think it's if we get it right, if we have a domestic drumbeat big enough and broad enough, if we don't over-focus on one part of the contract, then we can keep the momentum you need for winning orders, for proving track record, and Britain being a very respected navy, for example, in the world, when it buys a ship with a certain capability, or it buys a missile, or it buys a rescue boat, it matters to many. We're a reference sort of customer, and that matters for other nations around the world. It is always a challenge when you go to the very high end, because there are only so many countries that can necessarily buy those things. So like nuclear submarines would be a very good example of a very real challenge, and very few countries on earth can do that. And Australia has taken a decision it wants to buy a nuclear attack submarine. But ultimately, the broader the export, the more you can sell up and down the chain, whether it's design, box, metal superstructure, or radars and things, the better. And I think that sets you up for continuingly flow through the yards and through the supply chain. And if you think about British shipbuilding, it's not just the big yards. It's everything from the people that make the ribs. If you're up in the northeast of Scotland, those escape, for the oil rigs, all the sort of storm escape equipment, the skills that go there. When I used to represent the northeast of Scotland, Montrose used to have that skills academy to train people how to survive cold water. It's massive, British maritime industry, and we often get distracted by simply the traditional yard, but everything from Princess Yachts in Plymouth, I think it is, employs 3,000 people making expensive sort of super yacht type things, ships, boats. That's just as important, 3,500 jobs, as go down the road to Falmouth, where they're making Bay-class ships, or they're servicing them, or Pendennis. And the maritime industry as a sector shouldn't be just seen in one narrow bit.
Yeah. So having that sort of diverse range of what you can provide makes it more likely that there will always be a market for at least some of what you're producing.
And that's why skills are so important, because a modern shipyard actually, where I represent, I've got Barrow about an hour and a half to the north, and I've got in Lancashire where they make the Typhoon, and there's a lot of interchange. If you're a systems integrator, you can work on an aeroplane 1 month and you can work on a submarine the next. It's exactly the same. If you're a radar integrator at Scotstoun, you may find yourself over in Edinburgh or Glenrothes or in Edinburgh doing other radar work. You may find yourself suddenly at, I don't know if they still service aircraft at Prestwick, Navy things. I mean, it's all of that is possible. So the key here, and the thing I would really urge the Scottish Government on, and my own government, I talk about FE colleges and skills. I mean, it's really, really key. I'm a great fan of FE colleges. I think they are really fantastic. They have always been the Cinderella of the educational sector. They give fantastic opportunities. And what does sometimes sadden me is when you go to a yard and the FE colleges say things, as one of them did to me, I can't get in the schools. Because the schools want to send them all to university to do something different, and the yards are crying out for skills and jobs. All of us have that role in selling. There's a fantastic career in the maritime industry, or aerospace industry, or the engineering industry, and those FE colleges are really important. And that's why BAE's academy at Govan is really important because it's properly connected into the FE College around the Clyde, and they've opened a big one in Barrow-in-Furness as well, and it's really important that you know, the question I would say for Scottish Government is how are you engaging your FE sector in growing that skill base?
Okay, thank you. And I think Admiral Cox, I think you wanted to come in.
Sorry, if I may just add, so as part of the strategy, we set up the Maritime Capability Campaign Office within the Department for International Trade. That's a team of about 30, and they're specifically looking to take an intelligence-led portfolio view of those opportunities and campaigns. To put some figures on it, their assessment, and again, these are subjective, probably targeting just under 30 billion of international naval orders. And they're doing that proactively at the moment. And if you look to the successes, Secretary of State has talked about Type 26 to Australia and Canada on the design, but also, you know, Type 31, the Arrowhead 140 export variant, design's been sold to Indonesia and Poland. And the next question that you're fairly level at me is, okay, well, that's just the design. You know, nearly 60% of that supply chain for those vessels is from the United Kingdom. So right. The design is just as important. And when we talk about shipbuilding, we talk about the bookends from design, that first line on the CAD system, all the way through to through life support and everything in between. So I think it's a really vibrant, some really vibrant opportunities there, but that's why we've set up the MCCA.
I recognise what you're saying. I mean, I come from the oil and gas sector myself, and selling the design of something, whether it's a safety management system or whatever it is often connected with, yeah, and by the way, we have the people, we have the technology back home as well. We can sell you that when you actually build what you're building. Moving on then, in that case, thanks for that. The Home Shipbuilding Credit Guarantee Scheme provides an 80% loan guarantee compared to 95 or 100% in some competitor countries. I was just wondering, if does this place Scottish shipbuilders or shipbuilders across the UK at a disadvantage?
Well, the final percentage has not yet been decided, but I think it's an incredibly important policy, right? I mean, it is bizarre that we currently have a policy that it's, if you're a British company and you want to build something in a British yard, you're actually incentivised through other people's export credits to build it in a Norwegian yard, or especially in the oil industry. You know, if you want to go and build a rig from scratch, you'll probably get more of an incentive to build it in a foreign yard through their export credits than you would here. So, to me, the Home Credit Guarantee Scheme is absolutely key to the part of the National Shipbuilding Strategy to make sure we deliver what we want in that space. And there is still work to be done about what percentage of that is going to happen. But
so just having a home guarantee is an advantage.
Would be a good thing.
Whether it's as good as other home producers is less important. But, okay, that's so. Just finally, I mean, what else? And this is maybe a question, maybe more for Department for International Trade, but maybe the question is what conversations you're having with other departments such as International Trade to see what more could be done to further export Scottish shipbuilding expertise and technology.
Thank you. Well, look, the MCCO team and indeed the NSO team are regularly engaged with Scottish yards, both the shipbuilders and the refit and repair. You know, I'll give you some examples. We talk regularly to, and these are all stakeholders of both groups. Ultimate Boats, you know, Malin Group, Macduff Design, Coastal Workboats, who are just setting up, you know, they're setting up their new place in Glasgow, which is tremendous news for the industry.
Macduff Design, I'm delighted to hear that. It's my constituency, but
excellent. And of course, Ferguson's. You know, we have a very good relationship with Ferguson's, and working closely with them as the new chief executive and the new team there seek to address the previous challenges.
Sorry, just to divert a little bit, Macduff Design, obviously a part of Macduff Shipyards, or they're associated with Macduff Shipyards, I believe in Douglas Ross's constituency as well. I think one of the few, if not the only, manufacturer of steel-hulled fishing boats in Scotland. So it's good to see that connection as well. So thanks for that. And
indeed, MCCO in-country colleagues in Brazil, India and China are providing support to them in their various enterprises.
Okay, that's fascinating to learn. I didn't expect to hear that, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Secretary of State and gentlemen. Secretary of State, since Nicola Sturgeon became First Minister 8 years ago, the Scottish Government have completed one ferry. The UK Government have delivered 7 warships in the same period. What do you think that says about the respective governments investing in Scotland, workforce, and prioritising that type of highly skilled jobs and investment in Scotland by the UK government and by the Scottish government?
Constantly.
I think what it first of all says is why we needed a refreshed national shipbuilding strategy, and that all of us navigate the challenges around free open markets, WTA rules, etc. But there is a way forward in order to improve all our performance. And I think that's what I would say, is that the National Shipbuilding Strategy does have good buy-in from the Scottish Government at officials level. I think that's really important. I think it's important to understand how we can collectively indicate the potential to indicate to investors and yards that there is a pipeline worth investing into. And that is really important, that if you can, we talk about 150 ships over 30 years. That's not a guarantee all 150 ships will be made in every yard. And in fact, there may be times if we're successful when our yards simply don't have that capacity, right? But I also think, I think what it shows, and I'm afraid it's not much different in England, to be honest, which is, it was almost as if shipbuilding was a dirty word and people didn't really want to talk about it, and it was all very romantic, but actually, that's all behind us. I'm actually really proud of this strategy because it actually brings together parts of government who never thought they had a role in it. It gels together that, shipbuilding should be of interest to you. Most of our trade moves by sea. If you're the Department of Transport, you have the money to invest. And I think, I'm just looking at it's a dotted map, so I've just guessed, but it looks like there are 16 winners of the Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition in Scotland alone. We have a role in our technology in developing it. And if only we could believe more in our shipbuilding and be more outward about it and take it more seriously, some of the shortcomings I think the Scottish Government got itself into, where other governments have been there before in other times, where it was the photo op but not the investment in the skills and the yards and the management quality and the pipeline, we wouldn't have got into that space with Ferguson, for example. And I think hopefully what it really says is we all need to come together, irrespective of our political views of independence or not, and invest in our yards and understand that we have a great skill base to develop and we have a reputation we can get back. But we're only as good as our last contract.
Your point about photo shoots is well heard in Scotland, given the First Minister launched a ship with painted on windows. But I wonder, and I only ask this question because I know you take you try to get above party politics wherever possible in the important role you play in the Cabinet. But we had a witness to this committee for this inquiry, and I think it's important that the questions we have today are about our inquiry and the report that we will submit. Professor Keith Hartley, who has advised UK government departments and the UN, who told this committee, and I just quote him, "I don't see a future for a warship building industry in an independent Scotland." Would you agree with that statement?
Well, I'd certainly say that an independent Scotland's defence budget would not be of the size that could sustain a long-term shipbuilding industry for the Navy, because simply the capital investment required is so big. They would either have to do one of two things, which is cut something else, or be very, very good at exporting. That's a challenge for any country that's going to reduce its, I suppose, its revenues and its incomes, and indeed its defence footprint. So I don't think you would see the same level of shipbuilding in Scotland that you currently do in the Navy sector.
And I wanted to focus on the point that you raised fairly recently in your evidence in terms of a workforce, because something that certainly came through loud and clear is we have outstanding, talented men and women working in the shipbuilding industry in Scotland. We've been lucky enough to see them as committee members. But and this is difficult because we deal as a committee both with what the UK government are doing, but also the devolved responsibility for education. What more can the shipbuilding strategy, others within UK government do to work with colleagues in the Scottish Government to make sure this industry is attractive to young people? Are we doing enough to encourage young women to leave school, college, university, to go into the shipbuilding industry? Because I think for too long, all the graphics and the images around it have been a dirty job that no one would really want to work in. You said yourself, Secretary of State, it was seen as shipbuilding was a dirty word. Are we doing enough to make it more attractive to men, women in Scotland to choose this as a future career? Because with the massive expansion going forward that you've outlined today, there is a real need for these jobs going forward.
I think it's why it's so important to modernise yards, because you have to effectively break the romance that it's like, it's a photo op and everyone moves on. You have to show that it is building a ship is a highly complex, highly skilled job with lots of different opportunities, from the welder to the designer. I mean, the number of people in the FSS in the design, which is a Bath-based British company, how many are in that?
BMT, 120 skilled.
120 skilled extra jobs, because it's not just one person on a computer designing. So there are lots of outlets for your skills, whether you are in the industrial end or the design end, is all there. And I think, I met the unions who are fantastic at Govern, right? I met all the unions at Govern, like my local unions in Lancashire, and I said to them, when you speak to your local politicians, tell them about the importance of FE, because they were saying, they're as ambitious to compete as anyone. I mean, they'd said to me, we want to be able to win contracts when one day the Navy doesn't come to place its order. We want to be in prime position. So they know, they absolutely know. And I said, tell your MSPs, tell your MPs about the importance of the FE College. And, I think they have a role to play. And that's where Devolved and Union, United Kingdom absolutely should be working hand in hand. And exploiting the opportunities of both exports. I want to see Scots all over the world selling ships and helping design ships and build ships and doing all those things that we have a reputation for. And I think that is important to do it. But
is enough of that happening just now, or is there a concern that we don't have significant numbers entering FE at the moment, learning the skills that they will need in the coming years and decades?
I think that's a concern across the aerospace and shipbuilding industry per se. I don't think it's unique to shipbuilding. We have, the one thing that didn't stop during COVID was people retiring, right? So if about 8% of BAE retires, and I think that's roughly the number during COVID over 2 years, suddenly you've got a deficit across lots of areas. And I think that is the same in most of our engineering and STEM cell requirements. But, Raytheon, an American company, but in Rosyth, is doing fantastically well. I mean, and it is fulfilling orders for Americans in Rosyth. So I just think the thing we can do together is skills. I've always felt, and Kevin, your point about Harlan Wolff is important, that we've got to see them invest in the skills. That is right? But it is absolutely important that we recognise skills are like oxygen for businesses. It's almost more important than tax. It is more important than tax rates. If you don't get the skills, they move. They just move immediately. They don't muck around, because without the skills, they can't deliver what they're supposed to deliver. And I think the one thing the Scottish Government and the British Government can work really hand in hand on is improving the STEM skills, the science skills, the engineering skills. And then people have got choice in Scotland, whether they make missiles in Rosyth, whether they make warships in the Clyde, or ferries in Ferguson, or whether they do something entirely